All right, we're good.
Mm-hmm. Welcome, everybody. This is our replication project on functional behavior assessment and on-task behavior. We are we are Group 2 from the Eastern Standard Time, and my name is Kristen Ermack. Other group members are Ashley Atkinson, Dana Avon, Carly Baldwin, and Andrea Elliott. So I'm going to start us off tonight with I'll briefly discuss our article that we chose to replicate, and then I will discuss some of the research that we found that supports it. So our article is a 2008 study by Hawkins and Axelrod. It is titled Increasing the On-Task Homework Behavior of Youth with Behavior Disorders Using Functional Behavior Assessment. So the research question or the purpose of our study, Andrea's going to go into a little more detail about this later, but the article examined the effectiveness of function-based interventions on student on-task behavior. In the study, there were 4 male students aged range from 11 to 16 years old. They all resided in a residential treatment facility for emotional behavior disorders. Some of the exclusionary criteria included that all students were identified as displaying a high level of off-task behavior. The study was a single subject design, alternating treatment with baseline design. The dependent variable was on-task behavior, and the independent variable was exposure to 3 different conditions during homework time, including a non-contingent break alone, a contingent break with access to preferred activities, and contingent access to edibles. The primary findings from that article were consistent with the functional hypothesis that off-task homework behavior was maintained by escape from the task. Also, the FBA methods increase the likelihood that interventions that are implemented will be effective. So some of the limitations of our article, research was done in a residential facility, and that may not mirror the conditions in other environments. Also, a token economy was already in place before treatment, therefore may have impacted the results. And lastly, quality of completed work when the students were on task was not examined. So I want to talk about some of our research. We're going to focus in on, the research we chose focused on the dependent and independent variable. So on-task behavior and then function-based interventions for on-task behavior. So the first study we looked at was a 2011 study by Majeka et al., and that was on improving on-task behavior using a functional assessment-based intervention in an inclusive high school setting. So the primary findings from that article, results of the study demonstrated a functional relationship between on-task behavior and the implemented intervention. Results did also prove the functional assessment as an effective way to identify interventions. The second article we looked at was a 2007 study by Lane et al., and that was on a function-based intervention to decrease disruptive behavior and increase academic engagement. The findings from that study were that it demonstrated a functional relationship between total disruptive behavior and the implemented intervention. And results of that one also proved a possible functional relation between that and the introduction of the intervention. The next article we looked at was a little bit different. So it was a 2012 study by Gregory Hanley on functional assessment of problem behavior, dispelling myths, overcoming implementation obstacles, and developing new lore. So this article was more of an attempt to fill in the gaps that exist between how the functional assessment process is described in published research and then how it probably should be practiced. So some of the findings or main points from that article, he included a list of obstacles to using functional assessments, including the complexities and vast amount of time it takes to conduct a functional analysis, the risks involved for the client and the person conducting the analysis, the difficulties with trying to promote the need for a functional analysis to clients, and the inadequate use of a function analysis for dangerous, low rate, covert, multiple topography behavior that cannot be addressed by a functional analysis. So 2 more articles. The next one was a 2014 article by Davis et al. And that was on a comparison of self-monitoring with and without reinforcement to improve on-task classroom behavior. So that one really focused in on our dependent variable of on-task behavior. And results from that study demonstrated that while both self-monitoring conditions showed improvement in the percentage of students' on-task behavior, the self-monitoring plus reinforcement condition proved more drastic. So it was concluded that a functional relationship exists between student on-task behavior and self-monitoring and positive reinforcement. Finally, our last article was a 2015 article by Gahn et al., and that was on evaluating the effects of function-based interventions with deaf or hard of hearing students. So the purpose of that study was just pretty similar to ours, and to examine the effectiveness of the function-based interventions. And the primary findings out of that one were that, again, function-based interventions significantly improved participants on-task behavior in the classroom. So really there's a vast amount of research out there on using function-based interventions, and it all coincided with the article that we replicated. And that concludes the research section. And Andrea, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
All right, thanks, Kristen. So the purpose of our study was that we wanted to determine if developing interventions based on the results of a functional behavior assessment would increase the on-task homework behavior. We planned on comparing the effectiveness of interventions based on the FBA results versus interventions not believed to be tied to the maintaining contingencies of the problem behavior. Now I'm going to pass it over to Carly.
Right, thank you, Andrea. The participants of the study of the replication were 5 Ball State graduate students. The setting took place in the students' homes, or in one of their cases, a baseball field. The materials that were used were preferred activities, tangibles, edibles, smartphone or timer, various homework assignments, and computer with video capability. The behavior definition we defined was on-task behavior, and it was defined as actively or passively attending assigned work, including reading silently or aloud, typing notes, writing notes, looking in the direction of a video, lecture, or meeting, and listening using speakers or headphones. The data collection was in 15-second interval that was collected for 30 minutes, excluding breaks. Data collection started 15 minutes after 1 hour homework period began. And then continuing the method section, the design was an alternating treatment design, or an ATD. 5 baseline data points were collected, and once the baseline was stable, the treatment began. Break alone activities and break with activity and edibles. Each was done for 30 minutes, not including the break. Break alone was done with 10 minutes of work and then 5 minutes of a break. Break preferred was 10 minutes of work and 5 minutes of a break with an activity. And then edibles was work for 10 minutes and then an edible, and then consume the edible of choice while working. All right, on to IOA. 20% of the total observation was IOA. The IOA was taken by interval, which is the number of on-task behaviors divided by the total number of tasks times 100. The baseline IOA, each of the participants had close IOA data. Andrea's was 97% and 98%, while Ashley's was both 93%. Break alone, Andrea had the biggest discrepancy of 100% and 83%. Dana's was equal at 100%. Kristen had the second highest at 98 and 99%, while Ashley and Carly had 88% and 96% and 95 and 91%. Break with activity, 4 out of the 5 participants had close IOA. The lowest IOA was Ashley with 82 and 84%. Dana had an equal IOA of 100%, while Carly, Andrea, and Kristen were off by 1%, 3%, and 6%. Edible IOA, Dana had equal percent at 98. Kristen and Andrea had 98 and 99%. Ashley had 194%. And Carly had 92 and 99%. Treatment integrity. 20% of one phase, and each member of the group agreed that treatment was set for 100% for each of the video that was observed. And now I am going to send it over to Ashley, who is going to talk about the results.
Okay, thanks, Carly. So these are my results. My baseline average was 87%. The baseline range was 79% to 94%. My break alone average was 71%, and my break alone range was 60 to 91%. My break activity average was 96%, and my break activity range was 92 to 98%. My edible average was 89%, and my edible range was 80 to 94%. Now this is Kristen's graph. So for her baseline average, she had 90%. Her baseline range was 88 to 93%. Her break alone average was 97%. Her break alone range was 96 to 99%. Her break activity average was 100%, and her break activity range was 98 to 100%. Her edible average was 94%, and her edible range was 92 to 95%. So for Carly's results, for her baseline average, she got 73%. Her baseline range was 68 to 79%. Her break alone average was 90%, and her break alone range was 83 to 95%. Her break activity average was 88%, and her break activity range was 82 to 91%. Her edible average was 87%, and her edible range was 80 to 92%. So for Dana's results, her baseline average was 75%. Her baseline range was 73 to 75%. Her break alone average was 98%, and her break alone range was 95 to 100%. Her break activity average was 99%. Her break activity range was 97 to 100%. Her edible average was 96%, and her edible range was 94 to 98%. For Andrea's results, her baseline average was 90%. Her baseline range was 83 to 97%. Her break alone average was 99%. Her break alone range was 97 to 100%. Her break activity average was 98%, and her break activity range was 94 to 100%. Her edible average was 99%, and her edible range was 98 to 100%. So those were our results. Now I'll pass it back over to Andrea.
Thank you, Ashley. All right, so based on the results of the Functional Behavioral Assessment, or FBA, all 5 participants believed escape to be the function of our off-task behavior. Either the break alone condition or the break with activity condition was the most effective intervention for all of the participants. However, My edible condition was tied with break alone as the most effective intervention. Ashley and Carly found the edible condition to be the second most effective intervention. The edible condition was the least effective intervention for Dana and Kristen. Ashley's baseline average was only 2 points lower than the edible condition. Her baseline was significantly higher than her break alone condition average, which indicated that the break alone was not reinforcing for her. All other participants did show improvement from their baseline averages when compared to the 3 different condition averages. Andrea was particularly motivated by food, so that could explain why the edible condition scored just as well as the break alone condition. With the exception of Ashley's break alone condition, all of the other conditions for all of the other participants did show an improvement in on-task behavior compared to their baseline scores, which demonstrated that these are effective treatments. However, the results showed that the results from the FBA did not always relate to the most effective intervention for each participant. Dana and Kristen were the only participants whose results showed that the most effective interventions followed along with the results from the FBA. Carly had a slight increase in her on-task behavior from baseline levels to her treatment conditions. However, all of the treatment data from the 3 conditions overlapped with each other, so no functional relationship was demonstrated. Dana showed an increase in on-task behavior compared to the baseline data. However, all of the treatment condition data overlapped, so no functional relationship was demonstrated. Kristen also showed an increase in on-task behavior in all of the conditions compared to the baseline data. There was some overlap between the break alone condition and the break activity condition for Kristen, but there was no overlap between the edible condition and the 2 break conditions. A very small functional relationship was found with the break conditions for Kristen. Andrea and Ashley's data did not reflect a functional relationship, as the data points from the baseline overlapped with the treatment conditions. Ashley actually showed a marked decrease in on-task behavior between the baseline condition and the break alone condition. Our findings did not align with the original study. Based on this replication, an intervention reflecting the behavioral function as determined through an FBA was not effective. And now, over to Dana with our limitations.
Thanks, Andrea. No study is without its limitations, and our replication project was no exception. Firstly, a lack of varied participants was one limitation. Every participant in our study was middle-aged females enrolled in the same master's program. For this reason, the data is unable to be interpreted for individuals of other populations. A second limitation is a type of reactivity called the Hawthorne effect. In the behavior change project, all of our participants reported being aware of the fact they were recording themselves, which could have led to an increase in on-task behavior. For example, reactivity could explain why Kristen had both high baseline and intervention phase data. Another limitation that could have played a factor is the location each participant did homework. One of the participants, Andrea, recorded her baseline data while at her son's baseball practice. Her on-task behavior might have been overestimated because she would look up from reading her book for a couple seconds during the 15-second interval. The location she did her baseline in could have contributed to the lack of change between her baseline and intervention data. The time of day that the sessions were recorded also served as a limitation. 2 of our participants, Andrea and Dana, have kids. When they recorded videos when their kids were awake, there were more distractions, such as stopping to answer a question or help their children with something. When videos were recorded after the children were in bed, on-task behavior increased. The extraneous factor of other people present or not present in the room could have had an impact on the validity of the data. When sessions occurred after work, Ashley reported being more fatigued, which played a factor in the score she reported in the break alone condition. With all participants being active adults with busy lives, many sessions were recorded on the same day due to time restraints not related to school. We define on-task homework behavior as actively or passively attending to assigned work, including reading silently or out loud, typing responses, writing notes, looking in the direction of a video lecture or meeting, and listening through the use of computer speakers or headphones. When conducting IOA data for other group members, there were videos which the observer was unable to see the computer screen and had to assume that the participants were watching a lecture or reading material which was school related. Even when the computer screen or material were in view, there was no way to discriminate between looking on task and actually being on task. This is a limitation that could have also resulted in an overestimation of the target behavior. Finally, like the original study done by Hawkins and Axelrod 2008, we implemented interventions in the same order: break alone, break with activities, and edibles. For this reason, sequence effect was a limitation in our replication study. Without changing the rotation of the interventions, it is unclear whether sequence effect influenced the data in each condition. In future research, it would be beneficial to randomize the order of interventions for each participant. This concludes our replication project. Dr. Mudgall, do you have any questions for us?
Yes. I just wanted to see your graphs again because you had an ATD, right?
Yeah.
Right. So the sequence effects isn't a valid point here because sequence effects only come in play if you all did several sessions of break alone, then several sessions of break with edible, and several sessions of whatever the third thing was. So you just followed the initial thing, but you randomized afterwards on your own, right? Like, but because you alternated, the sequence effects aren't an issue with ATD design.
Okay.
So it isn't a solution for you, even though you customization same as the original study, and you could have varied from that, but it isn't a valid limitation because you didn't do a series of one intervention and the other. You still alternated, so the sequence effect doesn't. So one thing you all want to talk about is that you all have, for the most part, except I think for Ashley, was that Ashley's whose first graph we reviewed?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and you didn't do so good with mentions, right? You stayed low with one of them, right, Ashley?
Yes, the break alone condition.
Right. So except for Ashley, whose baseline was in 70s and then she went to 90s, rest all of you sort of had baseline around 90s already. So you want to talk about what is called the ceiling effects, that you already were so high in baseline, and perhaps because you were being observed, or perhaps because this is schoolwork and because you're graduate students, you generally are expected to have a certain level of on-task behavior. So you were already so good at the target behavior that there wasn't much room for you to show improvement, which is called ceiling effects. You hit the ceiling. So you all 4 out of 5 have ceiling effects. And in real life, you would have extended the baseline, because it could be that you were just doing so good because you were observing there of being on task. So in real life, we would have like extended the baseline to see if your honeymoon goes away and you come down to sort of a real, more actual representation of your on-task behavior. But you have time constraints because this is a school project, so you had to then stop your baseline and go into intervention. And so I wouldn't say that the intervention worked for anybody except for Ashley, who had room to grow in her on-task behavior. So and that's fine. It doesn't have to work, but you can't say that it worked because there's like 2% change, which isn't really anything beyond chance or anything beyond just continuing from. So you just want to talk about that this is real life, is time constraints and class project, and you couldn't actually play it out. And also that you were all your own observers, and the reactivity and the Hawthorne effect that you talked about. The part that you talked about, the baseball game and kids disturbing and all that stuff, the only thing that is most relevant it's not that the location played a difference, it's that you have data collection errors. Because if you're distracted while implementing the intervention, while also trying to like engage in the behavior and taking the data, most likely you didn't do the most accurate data collection. And so just talk about, so the last statement, I think, if it was Carly or whoever was doing the review, you read that, so the validity of your data collected during those times when you had all sorts of other disturbances is questionable. So, and that's the only thing you want to talk about. The location isn't the issue. It's more that you have error in your dependent variable data collection.
Does that if we took our data at a later time when we rewatch the video, do you mean the same thing by that?
Oh, I see what you mean. So so I was confused. So you're not taking data real time. So you're recording yourself?
Yes.
Yeah.
While you're at baseball game?
Practice, please.
What?
Baseball practice, yes.
Yes. So you're at a game, at a practice game, and you're recording yourself like this?
No, I just had
How
the
would you?
computer there doing homework while he had practice, and then I'd occasionally
Oh.
look up.
Okay. So then you say that the intervention is not implemented. So then you have errors with your treatment integrity per se, because you're not implementing it the way that you're supposed to be implementing it, without distraction, in a place where you can focus on work, without extraneous variables. So you would just say that your implementation, it was erroneous, which is, again, real life. It is a project, and this is what you have learned. So then you would say that there is a treatment implementation accuracy issue. But it seems like you've learned the right things, and you've covered everything, and you covered, engaged in all aspects of the project. So that's very nice.
Yeah, we had fun.
Yeah.
Very nice. We can go off air and stop the recording and have our different chat.
Sure. Andrew,